I want to, kind of start at a really high level and just sort of assume that the audience knows very little. I've sort of described this idea of financial contracts or securities, and to some people, this is just mumbo jumbo. So maybe just first for the audience, what is a security? How do you define a security?
Yeah, as you said, a security is a financial contract, right? So it's something you can trade, you can buy or sell. That basically gives you certain rights, financial rights over an asset. And it could be equity in a company, it could be, debt, and some yield generating asset, etc. So basically something you buy to profit from the benefit, from the work of others. So when you buy shares of Apple, you don't work for Apple. Apple has their own employees and CEO, etc. But if Apple does well, because you own a portion of Apple, then your investment appreciates over time.
So stocks and bonds are maybe the most.
Stocks and bonds, debt, all type of derivatives, royalty payment instruments, etc. These are all securities because these are basically financial instruments you buy, and you wait to profit from someone else, doing something.
Right. I guess like a mortgage is a kind of security, right? It's a form of debt, and you enter into a contract.
That's actually a good point. So in the US, loans are not considered securities. It's a bit of a gray area, but some people think they're not securities.
But if you package up a bunch of loans and then it's
correct. So if I borrow money from a bank, I'm taking a loan. It's not a security. But if if the bank takes all these loans and then puts them on under an instrument, and then it sells shares to that instrument against the yield of the mortgages, then that definitely is a security.
Right. So, you and I are both entrepreneurs and have started businesses, and when I think about stock in my company, what I think about is lawyers, and I think about giant long documents that are called a corporate constitution and investor rights agreements and share stock purchase agreements and lots and lots of phone calls and billable hours. And so today, when I think about a security and what that is, it feels to me, it's a lot like a giant pile of paper contracts and a court system that enforces those. So what is it that takes the securities and makes them digital? How do we go from my intuitive feel of what a stock is as an entrepreneur to a digital security?
So securities, as you said, they've started being paper and paper certificates. That's how securities were issued since the first security at the beginning of the 17th century, and they've been paper-based for the most part of the existence. So until pretty much the 60s, all securities were still paper-based, even publicly traded securities that were traded on New York Stock Exchange. So people used to actually, to settle a trade, you actually have to physically move a paper from one broker into another broker, and that's how it was used to do. And this obviously was not a very efficient way of trading, and stock exchanges in the US used to close on Wednesdays because they had to stop for a day in the middle of the week to be able to actually settle the trades, because there were hundreds of people working for Merrill Lynch or JP Morgan or whatever, running around Wall Street with bicycles and moving the stock certificates. So that's how they were done back then. And obviously that system collapsed towards the late 60s. There was what is referred to the paper crisis in Wall Street, where at some point in time, the volume of daily securities traded went from like 5 million to 15 million. And then obviously they couldn't settle things anymore because there was not enough people to move the paper around. So at that point in time, securities started to become electronic. And then in the US, it's well known that there was a creation of a central entity called DTC, which is a central depository like they existed in Europe before, where all these paper certificates were held. And then they had a computer, because there were computers already in the 70s, where they actually keep like a ledger of who actually was the actual beneficial owner of those physical securities that were held at a vault by DTC. So that was kind of like the first step towards digital securities, if you want, because you start being able to have
SWIFT was the first kind of electronic money, which is essentially like
correct. SWIFT is a good example of exactly the same thing. So SWIFT is a ledger that allows you to trade money electronically without having to physically move the money. So it kind of is the same thing.
Early digital forms of money. And
I would say, yeah, more than digital, it was probably electronic,
exactly.
as opposed to digital. If you think of electronic at a much more simpler, static way of doing things, and digital as something native digital that exists only in zeros and ones. Because at that time, the paper certificates still existed. They just have what's called a book entry security, which was basically an electronic representation of the security. And that, for the most part, all publicly traded securities in US, Europe, major markets are digital today. They're already digital securities today. For you and I, the stock in our company is paper-based, but the stock of Apple, when you go to Robinhood and trade, is a pretty digital experience, right? You go there and you trade, and you just don't know what happens behind the scenes.